At 11:52 p.m., on the coldest night Philadelphia had seen in a decade, 26-year-old Evelyn Mercer was bleeding on her own hardwood floor, one eye swollen shut, three ribs cracked so badly she could feel them grinding when she breathed. Her fiancé, celebrated federal prosecutor Damian Cross, the man the newspapers called Philadelphia's conscience, had locked the apartment from the outside before he left. Her phone had 4% battery. She had one chance to reach her brother. She typed the message with shaking fingers, misread one digit in the darkness, and sent it into the void. Across the city, in a room where men like Damian Cross had no power whatsoever, the message arrived. If you've ever wondered what happens when the wrong person gets the right message, stay with me until the end. Like this video and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The floor was cold in a way that got into your teeth. Evelyn noticed that first, not the pain, not the blood drying on the side of her face, but the particular coldness of the hardwood against her cheek. Brazilian cherry, Damien had told the interior designer. He had very specific opinions about hardwood floors. He had very specific opinions about everything. She tried to push herself up and felt the ribs go. A white crack of sensation that moved through her entire torso and forced a sound out of her mouth she didn't recognize. Something between a gasp and a word that never formed. She dropped back down, pressed her forehead to the floor, breathed in shallow sips because anything deeper produced that grinding, and the grinding produced panic, and panic made her breathe harder, and she couldn't afford that cycle right now. Think, she told herself. Think. The apartment was on the 18th floor of the Meridian building on Rittenhouse Square, one of the most expensive residential addresses in the city. Triple-paned windows, soundproofed walls, a concierge downstairs who had been hand-selected and very well compensated for his discretion. She had screamed once, maybe 6 months ago, the first time it had been bad enough to make her scream. The concierge had called up 20 minutes later to ask if everything was all right. Damien had answered. Everything was wonderful, he'd said, using his courtroom voice, warm and slightly amused, the voice of a man who had never been anything other than completely in control. She'd heard him hang up the phone and stand in the hallway outside the bedroom door for a moment, and that silence had been more frightening than anything he'd done with his hands. She hadn't screamed since. Her phone was on the floor 4 feet away. She'd dropped it when she fell, or he'd knocked it out of her hand. She couldn't remember which. The timeline of the last hour was fractured, pieces of it sharp and clear, and other pieces completely gone. She remembered the dinner. She remembered making the mistake of asking about the Van Thorpe case, the one that had been all over the news, because she had seen documents on his desk and recognized some of the account structures, and she had just been curious. She had just been asking. She remembered his expression changing. After that, the pieces. She got herself moving by not thinking about it, locked her jaw, pressed her palm flat to the floor, and dragged herself toward the phone on her elbows the way she had once read that soldiers moved through open ground. Low, steady, don't stop. The pain came in waves with a predictable rhythm, and she learned to move during the troughs, freeze during the crests, keep her breathing shallow and controlled. It took her approximately 4 minutes to cover 4 feet. She knew because she watched the phone screen. It had lit up with the time when she was halfway there, and she had focused on it like a landmark. 11:49, she made it to the phone at 11:53, 4% battery. Her brother's name was Owen. Owen Mercer, 31 years old, lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Fishtown with a roommate who worked nights. Evelyn had memorized his number the day she got her first cell phone at 13, because their mother always said you needed to know the numbers that mattered without any device to help you. Their mother had been right about most things. Evelyn had spent years wishing she'd listened more carefully. She opened messages. Found Owen's thread. The last text was from 6 weeks ago, just a thumbs-up emoji responding to something she couldn't remember sending. She typed with her thumb, one-handed, her other hand pressed to her ribs. Please help me. He broke my ribs. Apartment 18C. She misread the 6 as a 0. The 0 as a 6. She would never know exactly which digit betrayed her, only that somewhere between her brain and her thumb, with 4% battery and blood drying on her chin and the particular derangement that comes from an hour of trauma, she transposed a single number in a string she had known by heart for 13 years. She hit send. The phone died 40 seconds later. She lay on the floor in the dark and waited for Owen to come, for Damien to come back, for anything to happen. The cold moved up through the floor into her bones, and she let it because staying conscious was the only thing that mattered, and the cold helped with that. She counted her shallow breaths. 40, 80, 112. She did not hear the elevator. Possessive. Lucien Voss received the message at 11:54 p.m. He was sitting at a corner table in the lowest level of a building that officially housed an accounting firm on its upper floors. The lower level had no signage, no listing in any directory, and its existence was known to approximately 200 people in Philadelphia, all of whom understood, without being told, that discussing it publicly was not in their long-term interest. The room was lit by amber pendant lights and furnished with the kind of quiet elegance that announces money without needing to argue about it. At the other tables sat a city councilman whose face appeared regularly on campaign billboards, the chief investment officer of a regional bank, a man who had once run a major government intelligence division and now consulted privately, and several other people whose names appeared in various powerful places. None of them looked at Lucien directly. None of them needed to. He was 41 years old and looked it in the way that a well-maintained machine looks its age. The wear was there, fine lines at the corners of his eyes, a small scar that ran through the left edge of his jaw, gray coming in at the temples above dark brown hair. But everything was still functioning at a high level, and the functioning was evident. He was not a large man in the way that people expected. Medium height, lean, but with the particular density that comes from the kind of physical conditioning that isn't about aesthetics. He wore a dark charcoal suit without a tie. His hands were the hands of someone who had not always spent his evenings in rooms like this. His phone was on the table beside a glass of water he hadn't touched. He had 3 phones. This one, matte black, no case, was known only to 4 people in the world: his accountant, his attorney, his Lieutenant Marco Reyes, and his physician. When it vibrated, he picked it up without urgency. He read the message twice. Marco was already leaning forward across the table, having seen the notification light from his angle. Marco Reyes was 36, built like someone had assembled a human being from spare construction materials, and had been with Lucien since they were both teenagers doing things neither of them discussed anymore. He was excellent at reading Lucien's face, and he was reading it now. "Wrong number," Marco said. It was not quite a question. Lucien set the phone down, picked it up again, read the message a 3rd time. "Please help me. He broke my ribs. Apartment 18C. 5 words in the first sentence, and then 4 more, and then an address. No name, no context, no second message with a correction or a laugh emoji or any of the things that followed accidental texts. Just those words and then nothing. He checked the send time. 2 minutes ago. "Boss!" Marco's voice carried the particular flatness of someone who was trying to be reasonable. "Whoever sent that, it wasn't meant for you. Nobody who actually knows this number would text it. They'd call." That was true. Everyone who had this number had been told explicitly, voice only, never text. The number existing in a message thread created a record, however minimal. It was a precaution that had served him well. "Apartment 18C, Lucien said. "Could be anywhere in the city." "Could be." He sat with the message for a moment that stretched beyond what Marco considered comfortable, though Marco had enough self-preservation instinct not to say so. The amber light in the room shifted subtly as someone at another table moved. The councilman laughed at something his companion said, a practice sound, the laugh of someone who had been performing sociability for so long they'd forgotten what the genuine version felt like. Lucien thought about a woman he had not allowed himself to think about for a very long time. His mother's name had been Teresa Voss, née Catalano, and she had died on a bathroom floor in South Philadelphia when he was 14 years old after a night that had followed a pattern he recognized, even now, in the 5 flat words of a message from a stranger. She had tried to call for help. She had not been able to reach the phone. He stood up, reached for his coat on the back of the chair. "Meridian Building," he said to Marco. "It's the only building in the city with that floor layout where 18C would face the square, penthouse tier. I've attended 2 events there." He buttoned the coat. "Call Santos. Tell him to bring the car around to the service entrance." Marco stood as well, because that was what Marco did. "Lucien, if I'm wrong, we turn around." He looked at his lieutenant evenly. But I've been wrong before, and it cost me something I couldn't get back. So, that was all he said. Marco made the call. The Meridian Building's concierge was a man named Gerald, who was 63 years old and had held the position for 11 years and had been compensated very generously for those 11 years in ways both conventional and otherwise. He recognized Lucien Voss when Lucien walked through the lobby at 12:08 a.m. He recognized Marco Reyes and the two men who followed them as well. He did not move from behind his desk. He did not reach for the phone. He found something very important to look at in the direction that was not toward the elevators. The elevator opened on 18. The hallway was empty and lit by recessed lighting dimmed to night levels, a faint amber glow that turned the cream-colored walls the color of old paper. There were 6 apartments on this floor. 18C was at the end of the north corridor. Lucien walked without rushing, his footsteps almost entirely silent on the carpeted hall, and he registered several things as he approached. No sound from inside the apartment, no light visible under the door itself sealed from the outside by a deadbolt key turned from the hallway, which was not a standard residential configuration. Someone had added hardware to this door that allowed it to be locked from the outside. That was not an accident or an oversight. He looked at Marco. Marco looked at the lock, then at the door, then at Lucien. Lucien nodded once. What happened to the door took about 8 seconds and involved a tool that Marco carried in his interior jacket pocket and a technique developed through experience Lucien preferred not to catalog in his own mind. The door swung inward without noise. The apartment was dark and very cold. Someone had left a window cracked in what Lucien would later understand was a calculation, making the space uninhabitable for extended recovery. His eyes adjusted. Large open plan, very expensive. The kind of space decorated by someone with money and no particular warmth. Surfaces that were beautiful and functional and didn't communicate anything about the people who lived there. Or maybe communicated everything. He found her in the living area, approximately 12 feet from the front door, on the floor. She was conscious, barely. He knew the difference between unconscious and the state she was in. That suspended, damaged awareness where the body is present and the mind is reduced to a few critical functions, and everything else has been stripped down to the minimum required for survival. She heard him. He saw her try to react, her shoulders pulling in, a noise in her throat. "I'm not him," he said, quietly. Flat statement of fact, not reassurance. He crouched down. "Someone sent a message to my number about an hour ago. I think it was you." She was looking at him with the one eye that was fully open. The other was swollen to a slit, the flesh around it a color that had no exact name in ordinary life. Her lip was split. She had one hand pressed against her left side with the concentrated focus of someone maintaining pressure on something that really needed pressure maintained. "Ribs," he said. Not a question. She managed something that was not quite a nod but was close. "Can you tell me if you can move your legs?" A pause. Then she moved her right foot. Deliberate. Controlled. She was still in there working the problem. "All right," he said. He looked back at Marco, who was standing in the doorway. "Call Helena. Tell her to meet us." "Lucien." Marco's voice had a quality to it. "Now, Marco." He turned back to the woman on the floor. The phone was lying dead a few feet from her, its screen blank, and he registered the specific tableau. The woman, the dead phone, the locked door, the cracked window, the cold. And something settled in him that was not emotion exactly, not what most people would call it, but a hard, flat resolution that had a temperature and a weight. "I'm going to lift you," he said. "It's going to hurt. I'm going to try to make it hurt less, but I can't promise." He paused. "Is there anything I should know before I move you?" She was quiet for a moment, then barely audible. "Left side. 3, maybe 4. "Understood." He moved his hands with precision, getting them under her at angles that avoided the left side as much as possible, and he lifted her in a single controlled motion. She made a sound that he absorbed without reaction, because reacting wouldn't help her, and not reacting meant he could focus on not compressing her ribs and getting them to the elevator without dropping her or jarring her unnecessarily. She was light in a way that told him she'd lost weight recently. Not in a chosen way, but in the way people lose weight when their circumstances have been reducing them. Her name was on the directory panel in the lobby. Evelyn Mercer. He filed that away. The building's service exit opened onto a side street where Santos was waiting with a black SUV, engine running, exhaust sending a pale column of vapor into the frozen air. Lucienne got her into the back seat, got in beside her, and told Santos to drive before the door was fully closed. Marco took the front passenger seat and was already on the phone, his voice low and clipped. She drifted during the drive, which was expected, and he kept track of her breathing, shallow but regular, which meant the ribs hadn't punctured anything, or if they had, it wasn't catastrophic yet. He did not put his arm around her or do any of the things that would have registered as comfort, because a woman who had just been beaten by someone she trusted didn't need to navigate another stranger's physical proximity right now. He sat beside her and kept his hands in his lap and watched her breathe. Once, in the turn-off Market Street, she listed toward him, and he put one hand on her far shoulder to keep her upright, and the contact made her flinch so hard that the flinch clearly hurt her ribs, which hurt him to witness in a way he did not examine. "Easy," he said. "Just the turn." She straightened herself, pressed her hand back to her side. "Where are you taking me?" she said. Her voice came out rough, the words slightly wrong in shape, her split lip and the swelling affecting her diction. "Somewhere safe." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not. I own a property in Chestnut Hill. It's secure. A physician I trust will meet us there." He paused. "After that, you make whatever decisions you want. I'm not keeping you anywhere." She was quiet for a moment, watching the city move past the window. The buildings of Center City giving way to the darker, older neighborhoods of the Northwest. Stone walls, bare trees, streets that remembered when this was a different kind of city. Her reflection was faint in the glass, superimposed over the passing streetlights. She didn't look at him again for the rest of the ride. He didn't require her to. Dr. Helena Graves arrived at the Chestnut Hill property 11 minutes after they did, which meant she'd been moving when Marco called and had dressed and gotten in her car before the conversation was finished. She was 52, had done 2 tours as a combat medic before completing medical school later than most, and had the bedside manner of someone who had treated people in circumstances where bedside manner was secondary to keeping them alive. She did not ask Lucienne questions. She asked Evelyn questions, quietly and directly, and she got answers. Lucian stood in the hallway outside the room where Helena worked and listened to the sounds, the low professional murmur, the pauses. Once a sharp exhale from Evelyn that he felt in a part of his chest he wasn't going to locate right now. Marco stood beside him, and they didn't speak. There was a window at the end of the hall that looked out over the back property, and Lucian could see frost on the grass catching the light from the exterior lamps, each blade individually silver. 3 cracked ribs, Helena said when she came out 40 minutes later. Probable 3rd-degree sprain of the right shoulder, contusion and laceration above the left eye, which is going to need a few stitches. Subcutaneous bruising across her back, consistent with... She stopped. Reset. Consistent with someone who has been in multiple prior incidents, not just tonight. "How long?" Lucian asked. "The healed fractures. Radiographically, some of them are at least 2 years old." Helena held his gaze. "Whoever did this has been doing this for a while." He absorbed that. "Can she be moved in the next 24 hours if necessary? If there's no alternative and you're careful, yes. But she needs rest more than anything. Pain management, reduced movement, no stress." Helena's mouth compressed briefly. "She's been through a great deal. Her body knows that even if her mind is still catching up. She stays here as long as she needs." Helena nodded. She had worked for Lucien for 6 years in the specific capacity of being available when he needed medical attention that didn't produce hospital records. She had long since made her accommodation with the nature of the work, but she looked at him now with something that was a question, or maybe just an observation. "She's not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone different." She glanced back toward the closed door. "She asked me twice about the security of the property, not in a frightened way, in an assessing way. She wanted to know the layout." Lucien said nothing. "Just thought you'd want to know," Helena said, and went back in. He went in once, an hour later, when Helena had finished, and Evelyn was resting but not sleeping. He could tell from the particular quality of stillness that was too deliberate to be unconscious. The room was warm now, a space with dark wood paneling and bookshelves, and a bed that was built for actual sleeping. Helena had cleaned and dressed the cut above her eye. The The swelling hadn't reduced yet, but it would. He sat in the chair near the window, not close to the bed. "You don't have to explain anything tonight," he said. "I wasn't going to," she said. Her voice was clearer now, pain still in it, but the edges sharper. "All right." A silence that had more shape than most silences. "You didn't ask me anything downstairs," she said. "You didn't ask who did it, why, whether you had anything to do with it." "No." "Most people would ask." "Most people weren't available to answer," he said. "We can establish the details when you're ready to give them." She turned her head toward him, and even with the damage to her face, he could see something working behind her eyes. The same assessing quality Helena had mentioned. She was taking him apart and putting him back together and filing the conclusion somewhere. "Who are you?" she said. "Lucien Voss." A pause. He watched her process the name and watched the processing show on her face. The recognition, the recalibration, and then something he didn't expect, which was not fear. There was a version of the fear, but behind it was something more like a dark relief. The specific relief of someone who has been fighting very hard alone for a very long time and has just been handed a different kind of problem. "I know who you are," she said. "Then you know I have resources." "Yes." She looked at the ceiling. "I also know you have reasons for everything you do, including showing up at my apartment at midnight for a text message from someone you don't know." "I had a reason," he said. "What was it?" He was quiet for a moment. This was not something he discussed. He had not discussed it with Marco, who had known him for over 20 years, in any real detail. He had the particular privacy of people who have survived things by making the survival a closed room. "My mother," he said. "The same situation, different outcome." He stood. "Get some sleep, Ms. Mercer. We'll talk tomorrow." He was at the door when she spoke. "Evelyn," she said. "My name is Evelyn." He stopped with his hand on the frame. "All right," he said, and left. He sat in the kitchen of the Chestnut Hill property at 2 a.m. at a table with a glass of water and his phone, while the house breathed quietly around him. Marco had gone to make calls. Santos was outside. Helena was upstairs. The kitchen had white cabinets and a tile floor and a window over the sink through which he could see the frozen backyard, still in silver. He thought about Damien Cross. He knew the name, the face. He had seen it on news programs and on the giant promotional banners the city's Democratic political apparatus had been quietly commissioning since Cross started making noise about a mayoral run. Federal prosecutor. High conviction rate. Long career pursuing organized crime with a public fervor that people called courageous. He had a particular skill for appearing on camera in a way that was simultaneously magnetic and above reproach. The kind of performance that required continuous effort but looked effortless, which was the most dangerous kind. Lucien had files on Cross that were not complete but were suggestive. Certain cases that had ended in ways that benefited certain parties. Certain pieces of evidence that had gone missing. He had not paid close attention because Cross had not, until this moment, been his problem in any direct sense. That calculation had changed. He pulled up what his team had on record and sent a message to his intelligence coordinator, a man who operated from a server arrangement in 3 separate legal jurisdictions and who had access to financial databases that were not publicly cataloged, asking for everything related to Cross, his accounts, his associates, and anything involving an Evelyn Mercer, forensic accountant, last known address Meridian Building, Rittenhouse Square. The response came back in 40 minutes, while Lucien was still sitting at the table. He read through it without hurrying. When he was finished, he set the phone face down on the table and sat with what he had read for a long time. She wasn't just a victim. He had understood immediately that she wasn't a simple victim. Her mind was too intact for that, too operational, the assessment in her eyes too practiced. But the full picture was something else. The full picture was $60 million routed through shell accounts structured with the fingerprints of a very skilled forensic accountant, except that accountant had been out of the workforce for 2 years, at which point the methodologies changed slightly, became slightly less elegant, slightly more formulaic, suggesting she had been the architect of the original design and someone else, less skilled, had continued the work in her absence. She had been used. Built into a system while she was building a relationship, and when she'd been shaped thoroughly enough, she'd been extracted from the professional world where she might have noticed things and placed in the domestic sphere where she could be managed and accessed and, if necessary, disappeared. Cross had been patient. Patient enough to court her for 3 years before the engagement. Patient enough to keep the violence below the threshold of visible damage for most of that time. Patient enough to build the entire financial architecture using her credentials and then quietly complete the transition so that if it ever came apart, her fingerprints were on every piece. She was sitting upstairs with cracked ribs and a swollen face, and she was the only person alive who understood the complete structure of $60 million in criminal money, and she had no idea that was true. Or maybe she did. He thought about the way she had asked about the property layout. He thought about what Helena had said. Not frightened. Assessing. He thought about a woman who had spent 2 years in the same apartment with a man she now understood was a criminal, who had the skills to read financial documents and the training to recognize patterns, and who had, at the moment of crisis, still been thinking clearly enough to try to send a message before the phone died. Lucian picked up his phone again and added one more request to the intelligence query. Anything unusual in the Vanthorpe case that was currently on the news cycle. Whatever she had seen on Cross's desk that had precipitated tonight's events. He didn't sleep. In the morning, he made coffee. It was a habit left over from before, from years when mornings were the only quiet time, and he had never broken it regardless of what the house had or how many staff were present. He made it himself, black, in a French press, and was standing at the kitchen window with it when he heard footsteps on the back stairs. She came in wearing a shirt that was several sizes too large, something from the house's emergency supplies, practical and utterly without vanity, and moved with the careful economy of someone navigating significant pain but refusing to show it more than physics demanded. She was pale. The bruising had settled into full color overnight, a map of blues and greens and a specific deep purple above her eye that would have been alarming on anyone else, and was alarming on her too. But she moved as though it was a fact she had processed, and was now filing under things to deal with later. She stopped when she saw him. "Coffee?" he said. She considered him for a moment. Then she came to the counter and let him pour a cup, and she took it to the window across from him and looked at the frozen backyard and said nothing for a while. "The Vanthorpe case," she said finally. "You're going to ask about it." "I wasn't going to push the timing. I've been awake since 4. She turned the cup in her hands. "There were documents on his desk 2 nights ago. I wasn't supposed to see them. I wasn't looking. I was in his office looking for the phone charger, and they were just there." A pause. "I haven't been a forensic accountant for 2 years, but you don't stop being one. The structures I saw, I recognized them because I built them." Her voice was very steady, in the way that voices are steady when the speaker has decided that the only way through something is through it. "He built an entire financial architecture using my signature methodologies," she said, "while we were together, before I left my firm." She turned from the window and looked directly at him, and her expression was the specific expression of someone who has spent the night with a truth and come out the other side of it. "I don't know exactly how much money. I only saw 2 sets of documents, but the pattern I recognized, the routing structure, the shell company layering, it's not small. It's not a few million. 60, Lucian said. Her stillness was absolute. "You did your research," she said. "I did." "How long have you known about it?" "I received a preliminary report this morning. I had some prior intelligence that pointed in his direction, but nothing confirmed. Your situation confirmed it." He watched her face. "You understand what it means, what you are, in terms of the case. I'm the only one who can unpack it," she said. Not a question. "Because I built the original architecture. I'm the only one who knows all the load-bearing pieces. How it's supposed to work, and where it would fail, and where it's been modified, and how." She set the coffee down. "And that means... It means Damien Cross will not allow you to remain free and coherent," Lucian said, "and neither will whoever he's been laundering money for." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the frost was beginning to lift off the grass as a pale winter sun came over the property wall. She stood at the window, one hand pressed to her side, and looked out at the yard with an expression that had moved through several things and arrived somewhere that Lucian recognized. Not surrender. Not fear, exactly. The specific expression of someone who has just had a door close behind them and has realized that forward is the only viable direction. "All right," she said. "Then we need to talk about what I know." "Yes," he said, "we do." He set his own cup down and reached for the chair across the kitchen table, pulled it out, and sat down. She turned from the window. came to the table, sat across from him with the winter light on her damaged face, and looked at him with those assessing eyes, and in the space between them was a problem that was large and dangerous and entirely without a simple solution, the kind of problem that would require both of them to be exactly what they were. He opened his phone to the notes application. "Start from the beginning," he said. "The methodology. Everything you built." She looked at him for a moment, then she nodded once, pulled the coffee toward her, and began. At 7:43 a.m., as Evelyn Mercer sat in a fortified kitchen in Chestnut Hill and began dismantling the architecture of a crime she had unknowingly helped construct, her phone, retrieved from the apartment by Marco's team sometime before dawn and now connected to a charger on the kitchen counter, powered back on. 22 missed calls from Damian Cross, and one text sent at 3:17 a.m. that read, "You don't understand what you've done. Come home and we fix this, or I will make sure they believe every word I say about you." Lucien read the text over her shoulder. She read it twice. "Let him talk," she said quietly. "He's very good at making people believe him." She looked at Lucien. "Let's be better." Outside, the first news alert crossed the Philadelphia media wire. Federal prosecutor Damian Cross issues statement regarding the disappearance of his fiancée, Evelyn Mercer. Sources close to Cross describe a woman in psychological crisis, potentially manipulated by organized crime elements. A press conference was scheduled for 9 a.m. The story was already written. The frame was already built. And Damian Cross, standing in front of cameras, his face arranged in the precise expression of a worried, wronged man, was about to deliver it to an entire city that trusted him. Evelyn stared at the news alert. Then she looked up at Lucien Voss, the most feared man in Philadelphia, and said 5 words that he had not expected from someone who had spent the previous 12 hours surviving. "Tell me how you fight." Lucien had dealt with enough dangerous men to know that the most dangerous ones were the ones who understood narrative. Damian Cross understood narrative better than anyone he had encountered in a long career of encountering dangerous people. That was the conclusion Lucien had arrived at somewhere between 2 a.m. and the moment Cross's press conference alert hit the wire, and it changed the shape of what they were dealing with. A man who simply wanted Evelyn silenced would have moved differently, faster, quieter, with less theater. Cross was doing something more sophisticated than that. He was building a story in public, in real time, using every institutional advantage he had accumulated over 15 years as a federal prosecutor, and he was doing it before Evelyn had a chance to build a counter-narrative of her own, which meant the first problem wasn't the $60 million, or the syndicate behind it, or any of the other things Evelyn had spent the last 3 hours laying out across Lucien's kitchen table. The first problem was the next 90 minutes. He watched the press conference on his phone, standing at the kitchen counter while Evelyn sat at the table with a legal pad Marco had found in a desk drawer, writing in a hand that was too controlled for the pain she was in. She didn't watch. She had made a decision not to watch, and he respected that. Cross looked exactly right. That was the only way to describe it. Every physical element of the performance was calibrated to the precise degree of distress that would read as authentic on camera, without tipping into the kind of overwrought display that made people pull back. His tie was slightly loosened. Not enough to suggest negligence, just enough to say he hadn't slept. His eyes moved with the particular quality of genuine worry, the kind that comes from long practice at manufacturing it. He spoke about Evelyn with the tender specificity of a man who loved someone and was frightened for them, and he introduced the phrase psychological crisis in the 3rd sentence and let it do its work. By the 7th sentence, he had said organized crime twice. By the end of the first minute, the story was in the air. Lucien turned the phone face down. "How many people know you're here?" he asked. "No one," Evelyn said without looking up. "Owen doesn't know about you. I don't have friends Damian didn't vet." She paused over the legal pad. "He made sure of that." "Who would believe you without evidence?" "My brother." She set the pen down. "That's it?" Marco came in from the back hallway, phone in hand, his expression carrying the specific weight of someone who has absorbed bad news and is now transporting it. "It's moving fast," he said to Lucien. 3 local stations picked up the press conference live. 2 cable feeds. His people put together a package, pictures of her, the engagement announcement from last year, a couple of quotes from colleagues describing her as unstable. He glanced at Evelyn briefly. Not unkindly, but not softly either. He's saying she had a breakdown 6 months ago, and he's been managing it privately. He's got a therapist ready to corroborate a generalized version of it. Evelyn looked up from the legal pad. The therapist's name is Warren Fitch, she said. Damien introduced us. I saw him 4 times before I realized Damien was reviewing the session notes. She picked the pen back up. He doesn't have anything real, but Fitch will say whatever Damien needs him to say because Fitch has a problem with pharmaceutical samples that Damien has been covering up for 2 years. Marco stared at her. You knew about that, Marco said. I know about a lot of things, she said. I've had 2 years of very little to do except pay attention. The kitchen was quiet for a moment in a way that had texture. Lucien looked at Marco. Marco looked at Lucien. Something passed between them that didn't need words, a recalibration, an acknowledgement that the woman at the table was not the variable they had assumed she was. Write down everything you know about Fitch, Lucien said to her. Specifics, dates if you have them. Already on page 3, she said. Bashim. The conflict started at 10:47, which was when Marco pulled Lucien into the back hallway near the utility room and said what he had been not saying since the kitchen counter at 2 a.m. She's a liability. His voice was low and flat. I understand what happened last night. I understand why you went. I'm not arguing about that. But this is different. Cross is on every channel calling her name and using yours in the same sentence, and that is a problem we did not have yesterday. We've had cross-adjacent problems before. We've never had a federal prosecutor point a camera at us and say organized crime on the morning news. Marco crossed his arms. This is the kind of noise that brings federal attention, not local, not the kind we manage, the kind that comes with task forces and wiretaps and surveil. I know what it brings. Then you know we should be distancing right now, not going deeper. Marco held his gaze. She needs to go somewhere else. A shelter, a safe house outside the city, her brother's place, I don't care, but she can't be here. Lucien leaned against the wall and looked at the floor for a moment. When he looked up, his expression had not changed, but something behind it had settled. She's carrying $60 million of architecture in her head, he said. The people she's carrying it about will kill her before the week is out. A shelter won't stop that. Her brother's place won't stop that. That's not our problem. I made it our problem when I walked into that apartment. His voice didn't rise. It never rose. But Marco stopped talking. You know why I went, Marco. You know exactly why. Marco's jaw was tight. Your mother is not a reason to put this entire operation at risk. The hallway was very quiet. No, Lucien said. She's not. But she is the reason I am not going to stand in a hallway and talk myself into leaving someone with cracked ribs in a house with an unlocked door because it's inconvenient. He pushed off the wall. Find out who Cross is working for. The syndicate behind the 60 million. I need a name and I need it before they find out where she is. Marco didn't move immediately. His eyes tracked something in the middle distance that wasn't in the hallway, and his arms stayed crossed, and there was a long moment that could have gone a different direction. Then he uncrossed his arms. I'll need access to the financial documents she's been writing up, he said. She'll give them to you. She might not want to give them to me. Then ask her correctly. Marco made a sound that was not quite a laugh, turned, went back toward the kitchen. Lucien stood in the hallway alone for a moment and looked at the wall and breathed, slow and deliberate, the way he had trained himself to breathe when the internal temperature was running higher than was useful. His mother had been dead for 27 years, and she still showed up in the middle of things with a persistence that nothing else in his life managed. He had learned to treat that as data rather than sentiment. He pushed off the wall and went back to work. The document Evelyn had been building since 6 a.m. ran to 11 pages by noon. She wrote in the compressed, precise shorthand of someone trained to communicate complex financial information efficiently, account numbers without full strings but with enough identifiers to locate them, methodological descriptions that were dense but internally consistent, a timeline of the shell company registrations that traced back through 3 jurisdictions to a primary beneficial ownership that she had not been able to confirm, but had a strong hypothesis about. Marco sat across from her with his own notebook, and they worked the way that 2 people work when they don't trust each other but have temporarily overlapping interests. Carefully, with the exact amount of information necessary and no voluntarily disclosed surplus. You said 3 jurisdictions, Marco said. Delaware, Cayman, and a Liechtenstein Foundation. It's not a standard setup. Most people use Luxembourg or the Channel Islands for the European layer, but Liechtenstein foundations have a specific characteristic. The beneficial owner can be structured to never appear on any filing in any jurisdiction if you do it right. She turned her legal pad toward him so he could see the structure she'd drawn. I did it right. Which means whoever I was doing it for knew enough about international structure to specifically request it. You didn't know who you were doing it for. Her expression was flat. I was told it was a client of the firm. High net worth, concerned about privacy. We did this kind of work regularly, legitimately. She paused. What I didn't know was that the firm partner who assigned me the project was on Cross's payroll, or that my work was being fed into a broader architecture I was never shown. She took the legal pad back. I was 24. I was the best analyst in the firm. And I was an idiot. You weren't an idiot, Marco said, in the way of someone who is not offering comfort but stating a technical correction. You were positioned. There's a difference. She looked at him with the assessing eyes, and he looked back at her with eyes that had a different quality. Harder, less readable. The eyes of someone who had spent a long time on the other side of exactly this kind of architecture. Your boss, she said. How long has he known about Cross's activities? That's not something I'm going to discuss with you. If he knew and didn't move on it, that's something I need to understand. What you need to understand, Marco said with a precision that was not aggressive but was absolute, is that there's a level of this operation that is not your business and will not become your business regardless of the circumstances. What is your business is the financial structure, the syndicate connections, and whatever you know about Cross's direct network. He held her gaze. Stay in your lane, and this goes better for everyone. A beat. All right, she said, and went back to writing. The call came from Owen at 2:18 p.m. Her phone was still on the counter, and she saw the name and reached for it before Lu Shen, who was closer, could say anything. He let her take it, watched her face. Owen. Her voice did something when she said the name. A controlled softening, like a wire carrying current that briefly shows its warmth. I'm okay. I'm somewhere safe. I need you to listen to what Damien is saying and not believe it. She was quiet for a long time, listening. Her free hand was flat on the table, very still. Whatever Owen was saying had length and emotion to it. Once she closed her eyes briefly. I know what it looks like, she said. I know. Owen. She stopped. Waited. I know you've heard this from him already. I know he called you. Whatever he told you about me, it's... Another pause. Longer. He broke 3 of my ribs, Owen. This is not a breakdown. I am... Yes, I am certain. She listened for another minute. I can't tell you where I am right now. That's not because I'm being coerced. That's because if you know, he'll know, and that puts you in a situation I can't... She stopped again, abruptly. Something shifted in her expression. What did you just say? The quality of the room changed. Lucien moved from the counter to a position closer to her without fully crossing the space, just reducing the distance, reading her face. When did he come to see you? She said. Her voice had gone very controlled in a way that was different from before. The control before had been managed. This was locked. Owen? When? Today? A pause. What did he want? She set the phone on the table without hanging up, switched it to speaker. Owen's voice came through the small speaker with a thin metallic quality that didn't hide its strain. He was younger than her by 5 years, and his voice still carried a remnant of something younger than that, a register that came out when he was frightened. He came to my place this morning, Owen said. 8, maybe 8:30. I didn't let him in. He stood at the door for 20 minutes, Ev. He had 2 guys with him I'd never seen before. He said he was worried about you, that you'd been taken by people who were going to use you, and I needed to help him find you. What did you tell him? That I didn't know where you were? Which was true. A pause. He left a number. He said if you contacted me, I needed to call it immediately for your own safety. Another pause. Ev, he said if you didn't come back voluntarily, there were going to be legal consequences for you. He said there was evidence that you were involved in financial crimes, and he'd been protecting you, but he couldn't keep doing it. The kitchen was completely silent except for Owen's breathing through the speaker. Evelyn looked at Lucien. He looked back at her with an expression that was reading the situation and filing it and had not yet arrived at any outward conclusion. "Owen," she said, "don't call that number. Don't let him in your apartment. Don't go to his office. Don't respond to any messages from people you don't know." She kept her voice level and precise. "I need you to trust me right now. Can you do that?" "Yes," Owen said. No hesitation. Whatever doubts he'd had before the conversation, they were resolved. "Yes." "I'll be in touch when I can. Keep your phone on." She reached forward and ended the call. She sat with her hand on the phone for a moment. Then she took a breath that cost her. She didn't hide the cost. Her face tightened and looked at Lucy. "He's going to go after Owen," she said. "Yes." "He's going to use Owen to get to me." "Yes." "Then we need to move Owen." Lucian was already looking at Marco, who was in the doorway. Marco met his eyes and gave a short nod, which meant he had been forming the same logistical calculation since the middle of the phone call. "I can have him picked up inside the hour," Marco said. "Bring him here or to the alternative location." "Owen doesn't know about any of this," Evelyn said. "He's going to resist. He'll be given the option clearly and decide himself," Lucian said. "We don't force anyone." He paused. "But he should understand the situation is not optional. Cross is not going to give him a choice. He's just going to be less clear about it." She was quiet for a moment, something working behind her face that he was learning to read. The specific quality of someone integrating new data into a map that keeps getting larger. "What happens when Cross can't find me through Owen?" she said. "He escalates." "How?" "Publicly first. He'll increase the media pressure, add more detail to the psychological crisis narrative, possibly produce the therapist on camera." Lucien pulled out the chair across from her and sat. "If that doesn't produce you, he'll have less public options. He'll use the syndicate's resources." "The syndicate," she said. "What do you know about them?" "Not enough yet. My people are working it." He looked at her steadily. "What I do know is that whatever Cross told them this morning, they now know you're gone and you're with someone. They don't know it's me yet. When they find out, it changes the calculus," she said, significantly. She absorbed that, turned her cup in her hands. Outside the window, the winter afternoon was flat and gray, the light that color that feels like it's been diluted. "He told me once," she said, "that the thing he was best at was making sure that when a situation went wrong, someone else was already in position to take the blame." She didn't look up from the cup. He said it like it was a philosophy, like he was proud of it. A beat. I thought he was talking about his legal work. "He was," Lucian said, "and about everything else." She looked up. Something in her face had shifted to a place he hadn't seen before. Not the assessing quality, not the locked control, but something older and more tired and more honest. "He's going to make sure that if this falls apart, I go down for all of it," she said. "He's had 2 years to build the case, my methodologies on every account, my credentials on every filing." She held his gaze. "Even if I can prove what happened, even if everything I've written down this morning holds up, the evidentiary path goes through me. Prosecutors love a complex financial crime where the architect is the person pointing fingers." "I know," Lucian said. "So what's the play?" "The play is we get everything you know documented and verified before he can move the money or close the accounts. We find out who the syndicate is and what leverage exists, and we build a case that is airtight enough that no prosecutor in any jurisdiction would indict you without indicting themselves. You do that kind of thing often." His expression didn't change. "I do what's required." She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that it had become something other than just looking. "Why?" she said. "Not the answer about your mother. That's true, I believe it, but it's not the whole answer. Why are you still sitting at this table?" He was quiet for a moment that was genuinely quiet, not performed. "Because you're the most useful person I've encountered in a long time," he said. "And because the man who did this to you is going to destroy other people with the same architecture if we don't stop him. And because—" He stopped, considered. "Because I sat in a hallway 11 years ago outside a room where my mother was being discussed in the past tense, and I swore a specific thing to myself that I have not broken." He looked at the table. "I'm not breaking it now." She didn't respond to that. She turned back to the legal pad, but she didn't write anything for a moment, just sat with the pen in her hand and the legal pad in front of her, and whatever was moving through her moved through her privately, in the closed room she maintained, the same way he maintained his. Marco came back at 4 p.m. with a name. He came through the back door and Lucien was in the front room, and Marco's face, when Lucien saw it, had a quality he had learned to read over 20 years. Not alarm exactly, more the expression of someone who has confirmed something they hoped wasn't true. Mikhail Dragov, Marco said. He handed his phone to Lucien. On the screen was a photograph and a file. Russian-born, Serbian operational network. He runs a syndicate out of 3 cities, Chicago, Miami, and Philadelphia. The Philly operation is the smallest, but it's the newest, and it's being built specifically around financial infrastructure. He watched Lucien read. Cross has been his Philadelphia attorney of record through 3 shell structures, officially, in the public documents. Lucien read the file. Read it again. He's not just laundering for Dragov, he said. No, Marco said. He's Dragov's legal infrastructure, his cover, his access to legitimate institutions. A pause. Cross isn't a prosecutor who got dirty. He was Dragov's from the beginning. The entire career was a construction. Lucien handed the phone back. Dragov knows she's gone, Lucien said. He's known since this morning. He has eyes in the Meridian building. The building manager, we think. He'll know she wasn't alone when she left. Marco looked at him squarely. And Dragov's people know who operates in this city, Lucien. It's not going to take them long. The house was very quiet. Outside, the afternoon had gone gray-dark, an early winter dark that came down like a curtain, and the exterior lights had triggered automatically, throwing orange pools across the frozen yard. How long? Lucien said. If they're running it right, tonight, tomorrow morning at the latest. Lucien stood with that for a moment. Then he walked back to the kitchen, where Evelyn was still at the table, 11 pages of documentation in front of her, her hand pressed to her side with the habitual care of someone who has normalized significant pain, and he looked at her and she looked back at him, and he said, We need to move, tonight. She didn't ask why. He read his face, and she understood, and she nodded once and reached for the legal pad and said, Give me 10 minutes to finish. She finished the sentence she was writing, capped the pen, and stood up in one motion that cost her something visible, a tightening around the eyes, a half-second of absolute stillness while the pain crested and receded. And then she was moving, gathering the legal pad and the 2 additional pages she'd been cross-referencing, stacking them with the precision of someone who understood that documents had a hierarchy and the hierarchy mattered. Owen, she said. Marco's team is already en route to Fishtown, Lucien said. They'll reach him before Dragov's people do. You don't know that. No, he said. I don't. But it's the best probability we have. She looked at him for a moment with the assessing eyes, and then she accepted that, because she was a person who worked with probabilities and understood that certainty was a different currency, one that wasn't available in this market. She took the documents to the counter and found the folder Marco had left there earlier, and put them inside with the careful deliberateness of someone who intended to keep working. 10 minutes, she said again. And meant it. They moved at 6 p.m., through the back of the property, through a gate in the stone wall that opened onto a service alley. Santos had the second car, a gray sedan, nothing distinctive, the kind of vehicle that disappeared in Philadelphia traffic the way a single word disappears in a paragraph. Evelyn got in the back without being told which door. She held the folder across her lap with both hands. She did not look back at the house. Lucien got in beside her. Marco took the front. The safe house was a row home in Germantown, owned through 3 layers of legal entities that terminated in a name that had not been active for 11 years. It had been used twice before, both times briefly, and it was clean. The street it sat on was the kind of street that had learned not to notice things, and the neighbors were the kind of neighbors who had learned the same lesson. They arrived at 6:31. Owen was already there. He was sitting at the kitchen table when they came in, and he stood up fast when he saw Evelyn. Too fast, the chair scraping back, and she crossed the room and let him hold her and made a sound against his shoulder that she had not made in front of anyone else, a sound that was small and had nothing controlled about it. He was careful with his arms, keeping them away from her left side, which meant Marco's people had told him about the ribs. That was the right call. Lucien stood near the door and gave them the room. Owen Mercer was built differently than his sister, taller, broader, with the slightly unfinished quality of a man in his early 30s who had been athletic once and was still carrying it but hadn't been in a gym in a while. His face, when he looked at Evelyn's bruising, did something that Lucian recognized from the inside. The specific expression of a person absorbing damage they couldn't undo, filing it somewhere it was going to stay for a long time. He looked at Lucien over his sister's shoulder. Lucien met the look and held it. Owen's eyes were dark and measuring and carried something that was anger at a precise frequency. Not the wild kind, not the kind that needed to perform itself, but the kind that had found its target and was calculating distance. "Your Voss," Owen said. Not a question. "Yes." "She's here because of you or in spite of you?" "Both," Lucien said. "Depending on how you count." Owen looked at him for another moment. Then he looked back at his sister, who had stepped back and was wiping her face with the back of her hand in a way that was functional rather than emotional, clearing the evidence, returning to operational mode. "Tell me what I need to do," Owen said to her. "Stay here," she said. "Don't use your phone for anything except calls to me." She looked at him directly. "I mean it, Owen. Nothing. Not your email, not your bank app, nothing that has a location signature. Okay? I need you to trust me even when what I'm doing doesn't make sense." "I already said okay." She put her hand on his arm for a moment. Then she turned back to the table and opened the folder. Fuck. The breach came at 11:14 p.m. Not a physical breach. No one came through the doors or the windows. What came through was information, and information was sometimes more destructive. Marco's phone went off first. He was in the front room with two of his men running the external surveillance rotation, and Lucian heard the particular quality of the silence that followed a phone call going wrong, the kind of silence that has weight in it. He came to the doorway. Marco was standing with his phone at his side, and his face had the color and quality of concrete. "Talk," Lucian said. "Arenas," Marco said. The name sat in the air between them. Rafael Arenas had been Lucien's intelligence coordinator for 9 years. The man with the 3-jurisdiction server arrangement, the access to financial databases that weren't publicly cataloged, the one who had pulled the preliminary report on Cross and Dragov in the early morning hours. The one who had known, from the moment the query went out, exactly where Lucian's attention was and exactly what he was building. "What about him?" Lucian said. His voice was very flat. "He's gone dark. Phone, servers, everything. My people went to his location 40 minutes ago." Marco paused. "The servers were wiped. Not crashed, not damaged. Professionally wiped, the kind of wipe that takes preparation. You don't do that in response to a sudden situation. You do that when you've been planning." "How long?" "We don't know, but if he's been feeding to Dragov's network..." Marco stopped. "They have everything we pulled this morning. Every query, the Chestnut Hill address, the shell company analysis, everything Evelyn's been building." He looked at Lucien with the expression of a man who has spent 20 years in dangerous work and is still capable of being shocked by the specific shape of betrayal. "They know what we know. They've known all day." Lucien stood in the doorway and absorbed this without visible reaction, which was the product of 2 decades of discipline and not of not feeling it. He felt it. Arenas had been with him 9 years, had been present at the table during decisions that were not written down anywhere, had been trusted with the kind of access that was only given to people inside the innermost ring. 9 years. "Where's the documentation?" he said. "Here. We have everything Evelyn wrote." "They know we have it." "Yes." "Then it doesn't protect her anymore." He pushed off the doorframe. "It's not leverage if they know exactly what's in it." He went back to the kitchen. Evelyn was at the table, Owen across from her, the folder open between them. She had been walking him through the financial structure, translating it into terms that made sense to someone who didn't have her training. She looked up when Lucien came in and read his face in the way she had learned to read it, and she stopped mid-sentence. "What happened?" she said. He told her. All of it. Directly, without softening the shape of it. She went very still. Owen said something under his breath that was not quiet enough, but Lucien didn't register the specific words because he was watching Evelyn process it, watching her take the information apart and rebuild it into a new map in real time, watching her face do the thing it did when the calculation was running. "The documents I wrote today," she said. "Everything in the folder. They have it. Then they know I can reconstruct the entire structure." Her voice was level in the way of a wire under tension. They don't need the documents. They need to make sure I can't testify to what's in them. Yes. She looked at the folder on the table, then she closed it. There's something else, she said. It was not a question. She was reading it in his face. If Arenas has been feeding to Dragov, the move to this location is already compromised. He knew about Germantown before we arrived. Owen stood up from his chair fast enough that it would have been loud in a quieter moment. So we're sitting here, and they know we're sitting here, he said. We need to move again, Lucien said. Now. Where? Owen said. Where are we moving to that he doesn't... Owen. Evelyn's voice, sharp and quiet at the same time. Owen stopped. She looked at her brother with the expression of someone who needed him to trust her more than she needed him to be angry, and it worked because that was the specific frequency of their relationship, and both of them knew it. Let him work. Owen sat back down, but his jaw was set and his hands were flat on the table, and he was burning with the particular fuel of a man who can't protect his sister and knows it. They moved at midnight to a location that had not been in any query. Arenas had access to a commercial property in Kensington that Lucien owned through a personal arrangement that had never touched his primary network, a favor structure rather than a financial one, existing in the category of things that were kept separate by design. It was a warehouse space on the second floor above a legitimate auto parts operation, insulated, dry, furnished with the functional minimum. It had one entry and one exit, and both could be covered by two people. Santos drove. Marco rode with two additional men in a trailing vehicle. Evelyn rode with the folder in her lap, and Owen beside her, and said nothing for the entire drive. When they arrived, she went to the far end of the warehouse space, to a folding table near the window that looked down onto the dark street below, and she stood there with her back to the room for a moment. Lucien watched her. Owen started to move toward her, and Lucien put a hand on his arm briefly. Not hard, just a stop signal. Owen stopped. After a moment, she turned around. Arenas had everything we built today, she said, including the Liechtenstein Foundation analysis. She came back to the center of the room. That analysis pointed toward a beneficial ownership structure that I had a hypothesis about, but hadn't confirmed. If Arenas passed it to Dragov, Dragov knows I'm close to naming the beneficial owner. Who is it? Marco said. She looked at him. I need another 2 hours with the documentation to confirm. Who's your hypothesis? A pause that had meaning in it. The Vanthorpe case, she said. The one that was on the news. The one I saw documents about on Cross's desk. She looked at Lucien. Vanthorpe Infrastructure. It's a private equity fund with 17 institutional investors and one private beneficial owner who's structured to be invisible. The Liechtenstein Foundation is the final holding layer. She set the folder on the table. If I'm right about who the beneficial owner is, then this isn't just Cross and Dragov. This is a network that goes significantly higher and significantly deeper than anything you pulled this morning. The room was quiet enough that the traffic sounds from 2 floors below were audible. How high? Lucien said. High enough, she said, that the people involved would not hesitate to level this building if they thought it would solve the problem. Marco and Lucien looked at each other. Give her the 2 hours, Marco said. It was the first time he had advocated for her without qualifiers. She had 40 minutes. At 12:52 a.m., Santos came up the stairs at a speed that communicated everything before he said a word. 3 vehicles, he said, north end of the block. They're not moving. Lucien was already on his feet. How many? At least 8, maybe more in the second vehicle. Arenas, Marco said. It wasn't an accusation anymore. It was just the word for what had happened, a notation. Evelyn looked up from the documents. She had been writing for 40 minutes with the focused intensity of someone who understands that time has a specific value and is not wasting any of it. Her hand was pressed to her side automatically, a habit now, the pain managed and filed. She looked at Lucien. How long do we have? She said. Minutes, he said. If they're already positioned. She looked down at what she'd written. Back up at him. I have enough, she said. The beneficial owner. I can confirm it. She put the pen down. It's a man named Callum Vanthorpe. The fund is named after himself. That's the kind of ego that makes people sloppy. He's the private owner of every shell in the chain, and Cross has been his legal cover in Philadelphia for 11 years. She held Lucian's gaze. He's not organized crime, Lucian. He's institutional money, old money. The kind of money that owns buildings and legislators and has lunch with the people who write the regulations. A beat. And he personally authorized the account structures that have my credentials on them. The weight of that settled into the room. Outside, somewhere below, a vehicle door closed. The sound was careful, someone trying to be quiet about it. Owen was already moving toward Evelyn, positioning himself between her and the stairwell by instinct. Lucien looked at Marco, and the look exchanged between them in that moment was 20 years of working together, compressed into 2 seconds. The exit, Lucien said. Covered, Marco said. North window? Possible. Tight. Then that's what we have. He looked at Evelyn. She was standing with the folder pressed against her chest. The documentation inside it, 40 minutes of work that was now the most dangerous thing in the building. Her face was the controlled face, the locked face, but under it something else had surfaced. Not fear exactly, but the specific look of someone who has just understood the full size of the thing they are standing inside. You said you wanted to know how I fight, Lucien said. She looked at him. This is how, he said. We move before they're ready, and we move fast, and we don't stop. He held her eyes. Can you run? She looked at him for a half second with the expression of someone deciding something that had no good options attached to it. I can run, she said. Below them, the door to the auto parts operation opened with the particular sound of forced entry. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, functional breach performed by people who did this for a professional living. And then the footsteps on the stairs, measured and deliberate, coming up in the dark toward the one exit and the one entrance of a room that had seemed 20 minutes ago. The footsteps on the stairs had a rhythm that told Lucien exactly what he was dealing with. 4 men, military spacing, taking the steps in a staggered pattern that meant they had training and were not rushing because they didn't need to rush. They had the exits. They had the numbers. From their perspective, the people upstairs had nowhere to go and no reason to be in a hurry about collecting them. That assessment was going to cost them. North window, Lucien said, already moving. Santos. The rope. Santos had it because Santos always had it. A 40-foot nylon line coiled in the duffel he carried in every vehicle, a habit Lucien had installed in his team years ago after a situation in a building in Baltimore that had ended badly for reasons that were preventable. Santos pulled it out and crossed the warehouse floor in 6 strides and got to the north window and had it open in the time it took Marco to pull the heavy metal table in front of the stairwell door. The table hit the door at the same moment the first man hit it from the other side. The door held. For now. Owen, Lucien said. Owen was already beside his sister, one hand on her arm. He was white-faced and breathing hard, but his feet were moving and his eyes were tracking. He was scared, but he was functional, which was all Lucien needed. She goes first, Lucien said to Owen. You follow her immediately, don't wait. There are men down there, not on the north side. They came in from the south entrance. The north alley is clear for approximately 90 seconds. He looked at Owen squarely. After 90 seconds, it won't be. So she goes now. Owen looked at his sister. Evelyn was already at the window, looking down at the alley below, doing the calculation. The folder was tucked inside her jacket, pressed against her left side, held in place by her arm. She had made the decision to keep it on her body without being told and without discussing it, which told Lucien something about how she was thinking. 15 feet, she said, looking down. 14, Santos said. She looked at the rope Santos had tied to the radiator pipe, looked at her left side, looked at Lucy Yen. The ribs, she said. It wasn't a complaint, it was a logistical assessment. Right hand on the rope, left arm stays in. Descend on your legs. He moved to the window beside her. You've got this. She looked at him for 1 second. Something in her face that was not hesitation, but was something adjacent to it. The specific expression of a person who is about to do something that their body is going to object to strenuously and who has already decided to do it anyway. She grabbed the rope with her right hand, got a leg over the sill, and went out the window. The sound she made when her weight hit the rope was contained, a sharp exhale through the nose, controlled, someone managing pain the way you manage a dangerous animal, carefully, with total attention. She descended fast, using her legs against the brick wall, and hit the alley floor and stumbled one step and caught herself against the opposite wall and stood upright. She looked up and gave one nod. Owen went next, faster, less careful, landing in a half-crouch that he came out of running. He grabbed his sister's arm. Behind Lucien, the stairwell door shuddered. The table moved 2 inches. "Go," Marco said. Lucien went out the window. The rope burned his palms through the descent, and he landed clean in the alley and was moving before he fully had his feet. Santos came right behind him. Marco came last, and Marco had barely cleared the window when the stairwell door gave, and the first man came through, and Marco dropped the rope and ran. They ran north through the alley into the dark, into Kensington's particular nighttime geography of narrow passages and loading docks and chain-link fences that separated properties in ways that were not mapped by anything official. Lucien knew this neighborhood the way he knew several neighborhoods. Not from maps, but from having moved through it at speed in the dark on previous occasions. He ran point. He could hear Evelyn behind him, and he could hear the quality of her breathing, which was wrong, too shallow, too effortful. But she was keeping pace, which meant she was running on adrenaline over the rib pain, which meant she had a clock, and when it ran out, she was going to come down hard. At the end of the alley, he cut right, then left through a gap in a fence, then right again onto a service road behind a row of commercial units. Behind them, he could hear voices. One shout, then a radio burst, then feet on pavement. They had come out of the north side of the building and were following. "How many?" Marco said beside him. "2, maybe 3, Santos said. He was looking back without slowing. "Rest are still on the south." "We need a vehicle," Lucien said. 60 seconds north, Santos said. He was the one who knew where the cars were because Santos was always the one who knew where the cars were. They ran the 60 seconds. It felt longer. Evelyn was still with them. He checked twice, glancing back, and both times she was there, her arm pressed to her side, her face a study in concentrated will. Owen had her hand. The car was a van, older model, unremarkable. Santos had it unlocked and running before anyone else reached the door. They got in, Lucien last, pulling the side door shut as the vehicle was already moving, and Santos drove them into the grid of Kensington streets without headlights for the first 30 seconds, navigating by the ambient orange of the city sky, which was enough. In the back of the van, Evelyn leaned her head against the wall and closed her eyes and breathed. Owen had his arm around her, carefully. She did not shake. She breathed, measured and deliberate, and the folder was still inside her jacket, her left arm still braced over it. After 90 seconds, she opened her eyes. "Where are we going?" she said. "Port Richmond," Lucien said. "There's a facility." "A facility?" she said. "A place we can work from that Arena's never had access to. Physical location, not in any digital record." He looked at her. "Are you all right?" She considered lying. He could see her consider it, and then she abandoned the lie because it wasn't useful. "No," she said, "but I'll manage." The port facility was on the Delaware River waterfront, technically owned by a freight logistics company that had not moved freight in 4 years. The building was a converted shipping terminal, a long, flat structure of corrugated steel and poured concrete that had been retrofitted internally with the kind of functional infrastructure that didn't show on the outside: power, communications, climate control, a medical station in the back that Helena had stocked 18 months ago and which had not been used since. Helena was waiting when they arrived. Lucien had called her from the van, a 60-second call, and she had been moving before he finished the sentence. She met them at the side entrance with a kit and without questions, and she took Evelyn straight to the back room with Owen, and Lucien heard her voice go into its particular professional register, low, calm, directive, and the door closed. He stood in the main space of the terminal with Marco and Santos and 2 other men who had arrived separately, following a protocol that had not been activated in 3 years. The terminal space was large enough that their voices didn't carry to the walls. Sodium lights overhead, the orange-yellow of industrial illumination that made everything look like it was happening in an old photograph. "Dragov knows this building," Marco said. It was not a question. "He knows I have port assets," Lucien said. "He doesn't know this specific location." "You said the same thing about Germantown." Lucien looked at him. Arenas didn't know this one, he said. I built it after he was already embedded. It's outside his access window. You're sure? No, Lucian said. I'm not sure of anything tonight, but it's what we have. He looked at Santos. I need eyes on all approaches, roof and perimeter, now. Santos moved. He looked at the remaining two men. Positions at the north and south entrances. Nothing moves without my knowing about it. They moved. Marco stayed. Dragov's going to hit us tonight, Marco said. He can't let this go until morning. We have the documentation. We have Evelyn. We're the only loose end that can put him and Vanthorpe in a federal cell. He said it like a man who has spent the last 6 hours getting to a conclusion and has finally arrived there. He's going to come at us with everything he has. I know. We don't have everything we have. Marco's voice was flat and honest. Arenas gave them our disposition. They know our numbers. They know our location as of 2 hours ago. They know... What they don't know, Lucian said, is what she built tonight. The Vanthorpe connection. The beneficial ownership confirmation. He looked at the door to the back room. They know we have documentation. They don't know what's in it because she wrote the final piece after the breach, after Arenas was already dark. Marco absorbed that. If we can get that documentation out, Lucian said, to someone who can act on it, before Dragov shuts us down. Who? Marco said. Who do we send it to that Cross doesn't own? That was the question. That had been the question since 6 a.m., and every hour it had gotten harder. Cross had spent 11 years building his institutional network, placing his people, creating dependencies and leverage in the exact offices and agencies where this kind of documentation would normally go. A federal prosecutor with a 15-year career had relationships that were deep and structural, and not all of them were corrupt, but you couldn't tell from the outside which were which. There's a journalist, Lucian said. Marco went very still. A journalist, he said. The word had a specific weight when Marco said it. Investigative, national outlet, not local. She's been working the Vanthorpe infrastructure story for 8 months from the financial angle. She published a piece in October that Cross's people buried. She has no relationship with Cross's network because she's not Philadelphia-based. He paused. Her name is Diana Cho. She's been trying to get inside the beneficial ownership question for 8 months and getting blocked at every turn. You've been watching her. I watch anyone who gets close to things that matter. Marco looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating a conversation they thought they understood. If we give a journalist everything, Marco started, we give her Evelyn's documentation, we give her the shell company structure, we give her the Vanthorpe beneficial ownership confirmation. Lucian held his gaze. We don't give her us. Evelyn gives her a statement as a forensic accountant who was unknowingly used in the construction of the architecture. Evelyn's credentials are on the accounts. That's her statement to make, not ours. And what happens to us? We were never here, Lucian said. That's been the structure from the beginning. Marco was quiet for a moment. He was working it, checking it for angles the way he always checked things, the habit of a man who had survived a long time by finding the angles before they found him. It might work, he said slowly, with the reluctance of someone who does not like admitting that a plan they didn't design might be sound. It's the only play that doesn't end in a federal building, Lucian said. The side door opened and Helena came out, leaving the back room door slightly ajar. She crossed to Lucien with the unhurried gait of someone who has finished one task and is moving to the next and does not waste energy on the space between them. The rib situation is worse than this morning, she said. The running. She's got significant muscle inflammation on top of the existing fractures, and she's been managing it on adrenaline, and she's coming down. She looked at him directly. She needs rest and pain management. She is not going to accept either for more than about an hour. I know, he said. She also, Helena said, asked me to tell you that the folder is intact, and she wants to talk when you're ready. A slight pause. I have the impression she's been waiting to say something since Germantown, and has been waiting for the right moment. Lucien went to the back room. Evelyn was sitting on the edge of the cot, jacket off, Helena's compression wrap around her torso, the folder open on her knees. Owen was in the chair beside her, his elbows on his knees, looking at the floor with the expression of a man who has been trying to hold everything together and is discovering that everything is heavier than he thought. She looked up when Lucien came in. Sit down, she said. He sat on the stool near the medical station. The room was small and warm and smelled of antiseptic. The overhead light was a single fluorescent, functional, and merciless. In that light, her face was a document of everything the last 24 hours had done. The bruising settled into full dark color, the stitched cut above her eye, the pallor underneath everything that had nothing to do with the fluorescent. She was still the most focused person in the room. "Vanthorpe," she said, "I need to tell you something about him that isn't in the documents. Something I've known for 2 years and didn't understand until tonight." Lucian waited. "When Damien introduced us, Callum Vanthorpe, at a charity dinner 2 years ago, I thought it was a social introduction. Two of Damien's worlds overlapping. Vanthorpe was charming. Very old Philadelphia. The kind of man who makes you feel like you've known him for years inside of 20 minutes. She looked at the folder on her knees. "He asked me very casually about a specific accounting methodology, the kind of question that only someone with serious financial knowledge would even know to ask. I answered it. We talked for maybe 15 minutes about financial architecture in a way that felt like professional conversation." She closed the folder. "He was interviewing me," she said, "at that dinner. That's when they decided I was the right person for the architecture. Not before? That night. Damien brought me to that dinner specifically so Vanthorpe could assess me, and I sat there and demonstrated exactly the skills they needed, and I had no idea that's what was happening." The room was quiet. "Vanthorpe chose me," she said. "Not Damien. Vanthorpe." "It changes the prosecution sequence," Lucian said. "It changes everything." Her voice was level, but something behind it had a heat to it. "Because it means Vanthorpe's fingerprints are on the selection of the architect. He didn't just benefit from the structure, he commissioned it. He commissioned me, specifically, after personally verifying my capabilities." She held Lucien's gaze. "That's conspiracy at the origin point. That is not someone who received laundered money. That's someone who designed the entire operation from the ground up and used Cross, and used Damien, and used me as the tools." Owen looked up from the floor. Lucian sat with it for a moment, turning it over, checking the load-bearing walls. "Can you testify to the dinner conversation?" he said. "Yes." "Without documentation?" "From memory. I have a very good memory for financial conversations. It's professionally trained." She paused. "I can reconstruct the exact questions he asked, and the exact answers I gave. A financial forensics expert would understand immediately that his questions were not casual. A journalist," Lucian said, "would understand it too." Something shifted in her expression. She had been waiting for him to arrive at this, and he had arrived at it, and she allowed herself one moment of visible relief before she folded it back in. "Diana Cho," she said. He looked at her. "I've been reading her work since October," Evelyn said. "She's been circling the Vanthorpe story from the outside. She doesn't know what she has, but she's been asking the right questions and getting blocked by people who know exactly why her questions are dangerous." She put the folder on the cot beside her. "If we give her the documentation and I give her a direct statement, she can break this in 24 hours. Vanthorpe can't bury a story that's already built and sourced and ready to publish. Cross will move to discredit you the moment it goes public. He'll try." Her jaw was set. "But the story won't be about me. It'll be about Vanthorpe infrastructure and the shell company chain and the $60 million. I'm a source. I'm not the subject." A beat. "And I'm a forensic accountant with a clean professional record up until the day Damien Cross pulled me out of the workforce. Every one of my prior clients can confirm the quality and integrity of my work." She looked at him steadily. "Cross built a case where I look like the criminal. I'm going to build a case where I look like what I actually am. The person they used because they needed someone they could trust to do the work right." Lucian looked at her for a long moment. "You've been building this argument since this morning," he said. "Since 4 a.m., she said, "when I couldn't sleep." A sound from Santos above. Footsteps on the roof. The creak of the metal structure. Normal movement. Surveillance rotation. Nothing wrong. Yet. Lucien stood. He looked at Owen, who was watching him with the dark measuring eyes. "I need to make a call," Lucien said, "to Cho. When I'm done, we'll set up the communication, and Evelyn will record the statement." Owen said, "And after that?" "After that," Lucien said, We hold this building until the story is out. He was at the door when Marco appeared in the doorway, phone in hand, face concrete colored again. And the specific quality of his stillness told Lucien before he said a word. South perimeter, Marco said. Santos counted 14. They're on foot, moving in from the dockside. He paused one beat. Dragov's with them. The room did not move. He came himself, Marco said. Santos has eyes on him. He's running this personally. Lucien looked back at Evelyn. She was already standing. The folder was in her hand. Her jaw was set, and her eyes were the eyes of someone who has crossed the threshold of fear into the territory on the other side of it, the territory that has a different name, colder and more deliberate. Make the call, she said, right now, before they reach the building. He pulled out his phone, found Cho's number, one he had held for 8 months without using. His thumb was on the call button when the first shot punched through the corrugated wall of the terminal, high and to the left, a warning or a ranging shot, and the sodium lights above them swayed on their chains with the concussion and threw moving shadows across the floor. The second shot followed 3 seconds later, lower, and Marco was already moving and Santos was shouting something from the roof, and Owen had his body between his sister and the wall, and Evelyn stood in the swaying orange light of the terminal with $60 million of evidence pressed against her cracked ribs, and looked at Lucien Voss with an expression that he made the call. That was the thing people would not understand later, when the story eventually surfaced in pieces through channels that were careful and incomplete, that in the moment when the wall was taking fire and the sodium lights were swaying and Marco was shouting positions, and the entire situation had compressed to its most acute point, Lucien Voss stood in the middle of a shipping terminal on the Delaware waterfront and made a phone call. Calm, deliberate. The way a man makes a call when he has decided that the call is the most important action available to him, and everything else is secondary to it. Diana Cho answered on the second ring. It was 1:47 a.m. I have a source, Lucien said. A primary source, with documentation and direct testimony on the Vanthorpe infrastructure story that you've been working. You have 20 minutes to set up a secure recording. After that, the window closes. A pause of approximately 4 seconds. Who is this? Cho said. Someone who is not going to be part of your story. The source's name is Evelyn Mercer. She's a forensic accountant. Look her up. She's clean, she's credentialed, and she has the architecture of the entire shell company chain mapped from the inside. Another shot hit the terminal wall, further south, and the sound was a flat metallic bang that moved through the structure. Lucien did not react to it in his voice. Set up the recording, Ms. Cho. She'll call you from this number in 15 minutes. He ended the call before Cho could negotiate. He turned to Evelyn. She was already looking at him. 15 minutes, he said. I heard, she said. But what happened in the terminal in the next 11 minutes was not clean or cinematic or organized in the way that retrospective accounts would later suggest. It was loud and disorienting, and it smelled of cordite and the particular metallic cold of a building that had been a working dock and still remembered it, and it moved in fragments the way that violent situations always move, clear, sharp pieces with gaps between them where the mind was occupied with something other than recording. Dragov's people hit the south entrance first, which was the feint. The real push came from the east wall, where a section of the corrugated steel had been identified in advance. Lucien understood this only after it was happening, when the steel folded inward at a point that was not a door, and 4 men came through the gap with the practiced speed of people who had rehearsed the entry. Lucien's men had been covering the south entrance. They pivoted, but the pivot cost seconds. And seconds in a confined space against people who knew exactly where they were going cost something real. Marco took a round in the left shoulder in the first 40 seconds. He went down to one knee and came back up, which was Marco, and he kept moving and kept issuing commands because the alternative was dying. And Marco had a specific relationship with that alternative that precluded it. Lucien saw it happen from across the floor and felt something shift in his chest that was not panic. Panic was not a thing he had access to anymore. It had been trained out of him by a long time in situations that didn't allow it, but was something adjacent to it, something that had Marco's name attached to it and had been there for 20 years without either of them ever acknowledging it. Santos was on the roof. Lucien could hear him above, moving fast, the metal sheeting transmitting his footsteps with perfect fidelity, and then a series of 3 shots that were Santos working a problem, and then silence that meant the problem was resolved, and then Santos's voice through the earpiece. Roof clear. East approach. 2 down. Owen had Evelyn at the back of the terminal behind the medical station's partition wall, which was not ballistic rated but was physical cover, and physical cover was not nothing. Lucian had told him to stay there, and Owen had listened because Owen had looked at his sister and done the math of what was being asked of him. He crouched beside her with his back to the partition and his hand on her arm, and he did not know what to do with his hands or his body in this specific situation, but he kept himself between her and the open floor, and that was enough. Evelyn was on the phone. She had found the angle in the chaos, the 11 minutes of relative cover that Lucian's men were buying at significant cost, and she was using every second of it. She had Cho on the line. Her voice was low and steady, and precise in a way that Lucien, passing behind the partition to redirect 2 of his men, caught in fragments. The foundation structure, the Liechtenstein registration, the beneficial owner, Callum Vanthorpe, the dinner conversation 2 years ago, the questions he asked, her answers, the date, the names of the other guests she could remember, the name of the charity, the name of the catering company, because detail was credibility. And she understood that better than most people understood anything. She was bleeding slightly from a cut on her forearm where she had caught the edge of the metal when the east wall came in, and she had not mentioned it to anyone. The folder was open on her knee, and she was reading from it with one hand and holding the phone with the other. Lucien came back to the main floor. Dragov's remaining men, 6 of them, maybe 7, had taken positions behind the cargo infrastructure in the center of the terminal, the old dock equipment that had been there when the building was purchased and never cleared. It created a standoff geometry. Lucien's men had the walls, Dragov's men had the center mass, and neither side had a clean resolution available. This was the part of the situation that had a clock on it, because stalemates in buildings on the waterfront at 2 a.m. did not hold indefinitely. Then Dragov himself stepped into the open. He was shorter than Lucian had expected from the file photographs. That was a detail that the mind registered involuntarily, the specific surprise of a person being smaller in person than they are in documentation. He was perhaps 60, compact, with the kind of stillness that belongs to men who have operated in dangerous environments long enough that threat is simply the ambient condition of life and stops requiring a physical response. He wore a dark coat. He held a pistol at his side, not raised, which was a specific kind of statement, the statement of a man who does not need to point a weapon to communicate its existence. He was looking at this partition wall where Evelyn was. "Miss Mercer," he said. His English was accented and exact, the English of someone who learned it formally and spoke it as a precision instrument. "I don't need the documentation. You understand that. The documentation can be reproduced, discredited, lost. What I need is the person who can testify to it." He paused. "Come out, and this ends. Everyone goes home." Silence in the terminal. Evelyn's voice had stopped from behind the partition. Lucien didn't know if she'd ended the call or was still on it. He stepped into Dragov's sightline. "She's not coming out," Lucien said. Dragov looked at him with the particular quality of a man who is encountering an obstruction he had already calculated for. "Voss," he said, "I have no particular interest in you. Your operation, your city, your arrangements, none of that is relevant to what I need." He said it with the honest flatness of someone who means it. "This is not personal." "It became personal," Lucien said, "when you sent men into a building where she was. She carries information that will destroy something I have spent 11 years building." "Yes," Lucien said, "she does." A beat. Dragov raised the pistol. What happened next happened faster than the sequence of its components. Marco, from the left, moving at a speed that was not consistent with someone who had taken a round in the shoulder 40 minutes earlier and was the product of the specific fuel that men like Marco ran on when the math became simple. Santos dropping through the east wall gap from outside where he had repositioned from the roof. 2 of Lucien's men breaking from cover on the right flank simultaneously. The terminal filling with motion from 4 directions at once. The geometry collapsing. Dragov's positioned men losing their angles as the stalemate structure dissolved. Dragov fired once. The round went wide, not because his aim was poor, but because Marco had hit him from the left at the moment he fired. A full-body impact that moved the gun hand 3 inches, which was enough. They went down together, Marco and Dragov, onto the concrete floor of the terminal. And what happened between them in the next 90 seconds was not something Lucien watched because he was moving toward the east flank where one of Dragov's men had broken from cover and was heading toward the back partition. Lucien reached him first. It was brief and it was not clean, and it left Lucien with a gash across his right forearm that he registered but did not stop for. He put Dragov's man on the floor and stayed there for a moment breathing, and the breathing was the hard kind that comes after the body has been running on maximum output and is presenting its invoice. He pressed his back against the partition wall and tilted his head back and breathed 3 times, and each breath was a choice, a deliberate act, and then he stood up. The terminal was quiet, not peaceful. The quiet of a space that has been violently loud and is now in the aftermath, a silence with texture in it. The sodium lights had stopped swaying, the air smelled of the shots fired and the cold coming through the damaged east wall and the river underneath everything. Marco was on his feet. His left arm was at a wrong angle. The shoulder had done something additional during the takedown. And his face was the color of old concrete, but his eyes were present and tracking. And when they found Lucien, they did what they always did. The brief specific check that meant he was accounting for Lucien, the same way Lucien was accounting for him. Dragov was on the floor, alive, hands secured behind him with the zip ties Santos always carried. He was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man doing internal calculations with a problem set that had just changed significantly. Santos had the remaining men accounted for. Lucien went to the partition. Owen was on his knees beside his sister, and Evelyn was sitting with her back against the partition wall. And for 1/2 second, when Lucien came around the partition, he could not locate her status. Whether she was hurt, whether the shot that had gone somewhere before going wide. And in that 1/2 second, he felt something that he was going to file in the closed room and never examine, but which registered with complete physical clarity, a cold drop in his chest that had her name on it. Then she looked up. Her face was intact. She was pale and breathing hard, and her left arm was pressed to her side with both hands now, which meant the run and the impact of the wall breach had done something additional to the ribs. But her eyes were clear and present, and when they found his, they held them. The phone was in her hand. "I'm still on with Cho," she said. Her voice was rough. "She has everything." She recorded the whole statement. A beat. She heard the shooting. Lucien crouched down to her level. "Are you hit?" he said. "No." She looked at him steadily. "Are you?" He looked at his forearm. The gash was bleeding, but not structurally important. "No." She nodded once. Then she raised the phone. "Ms. Cho," she said. "Are you there?" A pause. "Yes, I'm all right." Another pause, listening. I know what you heard. I need you to understand that what you have is complete and accurate and documented, and I will make myself available for any additional questions you need to ask." She closed her eyes briefly. "Publish it, as fast as you can." She lowered the phone. The terminal was very quiet. Owen put his hand on the back of her head the way older siblings do, the gesture that doesn't need translation. She leaned into it briefly, just briefly. Then she straightened. Damian Cross was arrested at 6:14 a.m. at his condominium on the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. He came to the door in a bathrobe, which was the detail the arresting agents would later discuss with the tone people use when they are trying to describe the specific quality of a powerful person's collapse. He had been watching his phone for 3 hours, since the story began moving on the digital wire at 3 a.m., gathering momentum in the way that documented financial crime stories gather momentum when the source is clean and the documentation is verifiable, and the journalist has been working the story long enough to have independent corroboration waiting. He did not say anything when they showed him the warrant. He looked at it for a long moment, and then he looked past the agents at the hallway of his building, the nice hallway with the appropriate art and the correct lighting. And his expression was the expression of a man reviewing the distance between where he had been and where he was, and finding the distance incomprehensible. He said one thing quietly as they walked him to the elevator. The agent who heard it would later describe it as almost conversational, the tone of someone making a note to themselves. "She was supposed to be manageable," he said. The elevator closed. Callum Vanthorpe's attorneys contacted federal authorities at 9 a.m. with an offer to cooperate in exchange for considerations regarding sentencing. The offer was declined. The documentation that Evelyn Mercer had provided to Diana Cho, cross-referenced with the independent financial forensics that Cho's outlet had commissioned overnight from two separate firms, was sufficient to open a criminal investigation that did not require Vanthorpe's cooperation to proceed. His accounts were frozen by court order at 11 a.m. The Liechtenstein Foundation's assets were flagged through an international mutual legal assistance treaty by early afternoon. Mikhail Dragov was transferred to federal custody from a location that was not disclosed in any official communication. His attorney, reached by reporters, said his client had no comment. His attorney was not Damian Cross. None of this was clean or swift or satisfying in the way that endings are supposed to be satisfying. The legal processes that followed were long and complex and expensive, and there were months when it seemed like the weight of institutional money and institutional lawyers might reshape the case into something unrecognizable. There were motions and counter-motions, and periods of uncertainty that Evelyn navigated by doing what she had always done: paying attention, reading documents, understanding the architecture and the places where it was load-bearing and the places where it would crack. She testified 4 times across 3 proceedings. Each time, Cross's legal team attempted to position her as the architect of the fraud rather than the instrument of it. Each time, the cross-examination ran into the same structural problem. She understood the financial architecture better than anyone in the room, including the people trying to use it against her. She answered questions with the precise, unhurried accuracy of someone who has been trained to communicate complex financial information to people who don't want to understand it, and the juries understood that even when they didn't understand the specifics, which was the most important thing, she was never charged. Marco had surgery on his shoulder in February. The round had done structural damage that the field treatment had managed but not resolved, and the surgery was followed by 4 months of rehabilitation that he treated with the same systematic lack of complaint he brought to everything. He was functional by summer, and by summer's end he had stopped favoring the arm in any visible way, which was the goal he had established for himself in the recovery room and which he achieved on the schedule he had set. He did not discuss the night at the terminal with Lucien, not the specific details, not what had happened when he hit Dragov, not the shoulder. They worked together the same way they had always worked together, with the ease of people who have been solving problems in the same room for so long that the collaboration has become atmospheric. Lucien noticed once that Marco had started locking the door of his office when he was on calls, a new habit, and he did not mention it because it was Marco's business and Marco's closed room. Owen opened his shop in April. It was a vehicle restoration operation in a converted garage space in Fishtown, 2 blocks from where he had been living. The financial backing came through a small business loan facilitated by a real estate holding company that had no visible connection to Lucien Voss, and the terms of the loan were straightforward, and its conditions were reasonable, and it would be paid back over 7 years at a rate that Owen could manage and did manage, meeting every payment on the date it was due with a precision that was, Evelyn told Lucien once, deeply characteristic. The shop did well. Owen was good with his hands in a way that had never had a proper channel before, and the work suited him. The taking apart of damaged things and the putting them back together in better condition. He employed 2 people within 6 months, a third by the following year. He did not ask Lucien questions about the business loan's origin. He was a man who had spent 1 night in a shipping terminal during a firefight and had come out the other side with a particular set of recalibrated priorities. And among those priorities was the understanding that some questions have answers that don't improve anything. Lucien spent much of the year that followed working at the dismantling that he had been thinking about for a long time, and had never started because starting required a clarity about what came next that he hadn't had. He had it now, or something close enough to it to function as the real thing. The most violent parts of the operation, the enforcement structure, the territorial arrangements that required the ongoing application of threat, he extracted himself from by degrees, handing off or dissolving or redirecting depending on the specific component. It was not fast and it was not simple, and there were people within his organization who did not understand what was happening, and people who understood and objected, and people who understood and adapted. He had known for a long time that what he had built was not the thing he had intended to build. He had built it in the absence of other options, at an age when other options were not visible to him, and he had been very good at it in the way that people are very good at things that match some deep structural quality of their minds. The strategic thinking, the patience, the ability to hold complexity without being overwhelmed by it. Those qualities were his. What he had applied them to was a function of circumstance and choice, and he was old enough now to understand the difference between the two. The legitimate businesses were already there, had been there for years as the scaffolding that organized crime required in order to exist adjacent to the legal economy. He began putting weight on them. They held. He hired people to run them who knew what they were doing and gave them the resources to do it, and stayed out of their way except for the questions he asked, which were good questions. He was not becoming something simple or clean. He understood that. The past had a weight that did not reduce and a shape that did not change. What changed was the direction of movement, and direction was what he had. He found her in the back of the shop in September, the financial consulting practice she had quietly reestablished after the last trial concluded, and her professional standing was formally confirmed by two oversight bodies whose endorsement she had sought deliberately and publicly. The office was in a building on Sansom Street, a corner unit, second floor, with windows that let in the afternoon light. It was small and organized and looked like a place where serious work happened. She was at her desk when he knocked on the open door. She looked up. Something moved through her face, not surprise because she had always been several steps ahead of surprise, but something warmer and more complicated that she did not try to manage away. "Lucien," she said. He came in and sat in the chair across from her desk, the client chair, and looked at her. She looked back at him. There were months between them and a shared night on a waterfront and 4 court proceedings and a great deal of time in which they had communicated through intermediaries and brief calls about logistical matters and had not directly been in the same room. She looked better, not in the uncomplicated way that meant the damage was gone. Damage of a certain kind did not go, and she would be the first to tell you that, but better in the way of someone who has been in the process of reclaiming something that was taken from them and is succeeding at it incrementally, on their own terms, at their own pace. The office was part of that. Her name on the door was part of that. The fact that she had chosen her own furniture, her own desk, her own chair, down to the specific angle at which it sat facing the window, was part of that. The bruising was gone. That took time, but it goes. She waited for him to say why he had come. "I'm going to Lisbon in 2 weeks," he said. "There's a property there, on the coast." He looked at his hands briefly, then back at her. "I've been considering whether it's the right time to spend a few months outside the country." She was quiet, reading him in the way she read things. "And?" she said. "And I wanted to ask," he said, "whether you had any interest in a change of scenery." The afternoon light came through the corner windows at the angle it came through in September, which was lower than summer and different in quality. More direct, more honest. The light that doesn't have summer's softening warmth, but has a clarity that summer doesn't. It fell across her desk and across the side of her face, and she sat in it the way she had sat in the kitchen in Chestnut Hill, with her damaged face and her coffee and her legal pad, with the same quality of stillness that was not passivity but attention, a person fully present in the moment they were inhabiting. She looked at him for a long moment. "I have 3 client commitments in October," she said. "November," he said. Another silence. In it, something moved that neither of them named because they were both people who had learned that naming things too early was a way of losing them. "Portugal," she said. "The coast. There's a house on a cliff. It's quiet." He paused. "I do some of my better thinking there." "You've been there before." "Once. A long time ago." He looked at her steadily. "I've been meaning to go back." She turned her chair slightly toward the window, looked at the Sansom Street afternoon, the traffic and the people and the ordinary motion of a city going about its business. The city they had both spent the last year navigating the aftermath of an event that most of its inhabitants had followed as a news story and then moved on from. The city had absorbed it the way cities absorb things, not without mark, but without stopping. After a moment, she turned back to him. "I'll need to make arrangements for the practice," she said. "Of course. And I'll need to know I can leave when I need to leave." "Yes," he said. "You can always leave." She looked at him. He looked back at her. In the space between them was the full weight of what they had been through and the full complexity of what they were, and the fact that neither of those things was simple or resolved or without cost. And both of them knew all of that, and neither of them was pretending otherwise. "All right," she said. Check. They drove to the Portuguese coast on a Tuesday in early November, through an afternoon that had the particular quality of fall on the Atlantic side of Europe. Cool and clear, the light extraordinary, the sea visible for long stretches of the road as they came south from Lisbon. Evelyn had the window down despite the cold, her hand testing the air, her face turned toward the water. She said almost nothing for the last 40 minutes of the drive. The house was on a cliff above a small beach. White walls, terracotta tiles, a garden that had gone a little wild through disuse but was still alive in the way that things grown in Atlantic salt air stay alive. The sea was visible from every seaward window, close enough that on certain nights you could hear it clearly. Lucien carried their bags in. She stood on the terrace at the cliff's edge and looked at the water. He came out and stood beside her. The sun was getting low over the ocean, and the light on the water was the color of old gold, and the sound of the waves came up the cliff face with a rhythm that was older than anything either of them had been through. He reached into his jacket and took out a phone. Not his current phone, an older one. Its screen cracked and dark, the glass fractured in a pattern that spread from the upper left corner. He held it out to her. She looked at it. She took it, turned it in her hands. The cracked screen caught the gold light and held it in the fracture lines, the way broken things hold light differently than whole ones. "I had someone retrieve it from the apartment," he said, "that night, before anyone else could." She looked at it for a long moment. She had thought about that phone more than she had thought about almost anything. The 4% battery, the wrong number, the moment before she sent the message when she had believed with complete certainty that she was going to die on that floor. The phone was the artifact of a moment that had remade her life from its foundation, and she held it now with the particular care of someone holding something that has weight beyond its physical weight. "You could have told me you had it," she said. "Yes." "Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I wasn't sure what it would mean to you," he said, "whether it would be something you wanted to have or something you needed to be free of." She looked at him. The low sun was at his back and his face was in its own light, the particular unguarded quality of a face that has spent a long time being composed and has chosen, in this moment, not to be. "The best thing that ever happened to me," she said quietly, looking at the cracked screen, "was a wrong number." He said nothing. He didn't need to. She looked at the water for a long time. The waves came in below the cliff and broke and receded and came in again, the same motion it had been making for longer than anyone had been standing on this cliff to watch it. The gold left the light gradually, and the water went silver, and then gray, and the first stars appeared over the horizon. She did not throw the phone over the cliff. She had considered it in the moment when he handed it to her. She was honest enough to admit that she had considered it, the clean gesture, the closure of the thing going into the water. But she kept it, closed her hand around it and kept it, because she was a person who had learned through considerable experience that the things that broke you and the things that made you were sometimes the same object, and that keeping them was not weakness. She turned from the water. He was still there. He had always been there from the moment he buttoned his coat and said, "Start the engine," and she had spent a long time deciding what to do with that fact, and she had decided. She took his hand. They walked inside together, out of the November dark, and into the lit warmth of the house above the sea, neither of them speaking, neither of them needing to, carrying between them the weight of everything they had been through and the uncertain, necessary lightness of what they were choosing to move toward. Behind them, the sea kept going. It didn't care about any of it. It just kept going, which was, in the end, the right idea.